Now, when I was listening to this album, I was walking through 30 Rock and Midtown Manhattan, and I just kind of felt connected to it. And
That's amazing.
it was a
That's
good
like the
sound.
perfect location to listen to.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. I'm glad you see it too, because it just felt very New York City, and it wasn't, because my surrounding area was very loud, but this album is not very loud, and it was comfortable, and it was pulsating, and it was perfect walking music. And being that like New York City is kind of a bit of an influence on this album, tell me about this New York connection to this album, its connection to the New York Public Library. Where was your head at here?
Well, I think I'd have to start by like saying that I'm from White Plains originally, suburbs, and I grew up going to New York, and in particular, like when I was very young, we would go to Manhattan. We would do all the things like we'd go to Central Park, and my mom would take me to the museums and stuff, and my dad would take me to Lower East Side, and we'd get like bagels and just like kind of fun, cute touristy stuff. And then like when I got a little older, my brother moved to Brooklyn, so then I was like going to Brooklyn. And then after college, I moved to Brooklyn, and I lived in New York for like 10 years. So I've been like going to the city and living in the city pretty much all my life, until 4 years ago when I moved to LA. Um, and yeah, so like I think it kind of this record doesn't. It's not like a concept album. There's no clear like, oh, it's about this thing, or it's like et cetera, et cetera. But it's kind of like juxtaposes a few things next to each other in like a way that I intend to be kind of like thought provoking or something, but not necessarily be like, oh, it's about X, Y, or Z. But like one of the things I wanted to just juxtapose was like New York City as like a place and like a feeling, sort of the wonder and like the energy of like this classic like New York thing. And I associate like those touristy things like the museums and the culture in Central Park with a kind of like a whimsical, like intellectual, fun kind of like museumy thing that like has always existed in my mind as like a fun thing to like play around with or something like that. And I had this idea of like making an album that was like each song on it was originally going to be a different hall in the Museum of Natural History. That was my like original idea for it. So I was like, oh, there would be one thing that feels like oceanic and one thing that feels like blah blah blah. And then like the other connection was like not just New York, but like the natural world, quote unquote, and like animality and evolution and all these things that are like embedded in us. Because like the fun thing about the Museum of Natural History is like it's New Yorky, but it's also like you're literally just learning about like the bios, the different like places on the earth and all that kind of stuff, animal kingdom, whatnot. So from there, I started thinking about like animality and all that stuff, and I wanted to juxtapose the two things. So like New York and like nature. And then the other fun thing about that too is like New York represents like urban and like man-made, whereas like nature represents like untouched and like natural. So that was like a fun juxtaposition too. Um, and so yeah, then like as far as like thinking about New York, I was kind of like tapping into this nostalgia that I have for the city and like childhood memories I have of going there, and also as an adult, like wandering around the city as like a anonymous like bystander. Like I love that. I love being like in an ocean of people in Manhattan and like feeling totally inconsequential and like invisible. It's kind of like a cool feeling I get sometimes when I'm in New York. And so like on that track, Central Park West, that's kind of like what I'm trying to channel of like I'm just this like anonymous like uh, bystander who's observing the city like unfolding. And like for anyone who's experienced the city in that way, it is such an amazing thing to witness and walk through. And like you turn a corner and you do this and you do that, and it's so weird and strange and wondrous. So that was kind of like what I was trying to evoke with that.